And indeed, we had the European conference, European Public Health Conference with youth and ASFER, and this is one of the issues. Shoshana, the Health 2020 and the Public Health Action Program that you have, Hans Kluge, Director of the Health Service and Public Health Department, have a very important element of capacity building in that area, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in my view, we know what we need to communicate. We also know how to communicate it. But we need to specify our target audience more clearly, and also the media that we use. And in my view, we need to communicate more to the prime ministers, and this is why I was very encouraged to see that your prime minister came this morning to open a health conference, and he also stayed here for the first hour to listen to us, which is a great signal and great sign. And we have to reach out to the prime ministers, and we have to reach out much more to the sectoral ministers. And I'm impressed to see that we have a Minister of Education and Minister of Education and Science in this group. Because with the recent studies that we have published on social determinants, for example, it is very clear that unless we reach out to the social policy sector and to the education sector, it will not be possible for us to make further progress. So in my view, it is absolutely critical to identify the key target audience and the key messages that we want to share with them. And I'm hoping that in the upcoming presidencies, we can organize joint conferences like this with the social policy sector to discuss the recommendations, and particularly the policy recommendations of the social determinants report, and also similar conferences with the education sector. And I'm looking at the Greek presidency, for example, and the upcoming presidencies to discuss this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Mark, we had about Horizon 2020 meeting on social sciences and humanities, which was attended by Commissioner and a lot of participants, for 500. So interesting discussion was what they were saying about science. Social and humanities said, give us a little piece of Horizon 2020 money, and we will make society happy with what are you doing with the science. So I do like, you know, in the humorous style, but in essence, it was a message from the social sciences and humanities. And in fact, these structures should be used for preparing society for what we are proposing from political side of view. I think it's the same translates exactly to the healthcare changes. We should open up, not to be a closed society like sometimes universities or scientists are. They are quite homogeneous. So maybe opening up to the social sciences, to non-governmental organizations, to even to maybe to education and scientific community will be making changes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me move on now to the industry, the pharmaceutical industry in this case. Christopher Viebacker, who's the Chief Executive of Sanofi and the President of one of the sponsors, thank you very much, of this conference, of the organizers of this conference, FPA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. Do we know it all in innovation? We heard that we know, we understand, we need to move to action, we need to be better in communicating, in this bridge, doing this bridge much better, as you brought Minister very effectively to the table. What about innovation? Are we dealing well with innovation in Europe? Are we do we believe that all the innovation is good, some innovation is less good? What's the perspective from an industry which is all about innovation?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's great to be on a panel here. I'd also like to say that I think it's extremely important to have the Minister of Education and Science, because, you know, if you ask the question about communication, I personally don't think we do a good job of that, because in order to have good communication, you have to have a coherent and consistent message. And we tend to communicate about health, or we communicate about innovation, or we communicate about the economic crisis, but we don't actually link those up.
As a group, as policymakers, or from the industry perspective?
Yeah, because if I'm an industry, if I'm talking about innovation, generally we are talking to the Minister of Health. And the Minister of Health we're trying to convince the Minister of Health to buy the innovation. and the Minister of Health typically doesn't want to buy the innovation. But the Minister of Innovation wants more innovation because obviously
Jobs
we
and-
want the jobs and the investment in research and development. And so I think you can't really talk about innovation in an isolated way. We have to actually put this in a framework. If the concept of this conference is sustainable health and sustainability of our healthcare systems, which I think is extremely important as an industry, we all have an extremely important vested interest in the sustainability of healthcare, because at the end of the day, we cannot continue to invest as an industry 30 billion euro every year in research and development if there isn't going to be a market at some point. And I think there is a market. But if you're going to have sustainability, there's only three ways I think you can do it. You're either going to have to reduce the resource burden, you're either going to have to reduce the demand for healthcare, or you're going to have to improve economic growth so that there's more means to fund that. And in a sense, I think innovation plays a role in all of these. If you want to reduce resource burden, then there are a number of ways of doing it. You've heard a number of solutions here about moving from a hospital-based healthcare system, which was developed in the 1930s, to a more community healthcare, primary care healthcare basis, which corresponds to modern chronic diseases. We can use certainly more nurses than physicians, because in a lot of ways we need to coach people as to how to deal with chronic diseases. But I would also submit there's a huge opportunity in innovation in using technologies. If you're going to really manage chronic diseases, you really have to help people cope with those. Type 2 diabetes is the #1 cost burden. We will not get our healthcare costs under control if we do not do a better job of managing type 2 diabetes. Both people who have it, but also the huge number of people who have pre-diabetic conditions. And so using mobile health technologies, for example, in the United States, I saw an example where using Bluetooth-enabled weigh scales, one healthcare insurance company, Aetna, manages to track people's weight every day. And those are people with congestive heart failure, where you often have the condition of edema. And they know that at a certain point in time, that edema, the fluid gain, causes an increase in weight, and they've got an algorithm that determines when that is at a critical stage. They send a nurse out to adapt the treatment paradigm for the patient, and they have been able to reduce hospital readmission due to congestive heart failure by 40%, a massive increase in resource gain. If we're talking about reducing the resource requirements, then I think what we can do is look at saying, how do we prevent people from getting these diseases? 75% of our healthcare resources are going to chronic diseases. In a healthcare system that is really designed around providing treatment, but not really providing wellness. So we have sick care systems, we don't have healthcare systems. So we don't really allocate resources to education, for example. And I think having a community-based approach to healthcare, and so we have worked at the World Economic Forum, for example, to develop in partnership with the WHO, with the healthcare industry, with the food and beverage industry, to create something we call a global charter for healthy living, which demonstrates the innovative approach, actually, of trying to bring everybody to the table together. There is a very good reason why we are more inclined to eat French fries than spinach. And it is because of biological evolution. There are hormones in our brain that are driving us to store energy. And we have to have an adult conversation about healthcare and not have so much just the finger pointing about whether it's the wrong food, or it's expensive drugs, or people are not really having willpower. This requires an innovative dialogue amongst everybody in the community about how we're going to deal with these issues. And the final thing is, how do we get more resources into play? And that is in very much the way the minister was talking about. If we're going to have to deal with our economic issues in Europe, we're only going to get out of it through economic growth. And you're only going to get out of economic growth by producing more value-added goods and services. Europe is not going to be a low-cost environment. We're not going to be competing with the Bangladeshis of this world. So we need skills, we need knowledge, we need those industries that create value-added. The healthcare industry in Europe exports 300 billion euro outside the European Union, and we contribute to the balance of trade to the tune of 80 billion euros. I've already talked about the 30 billion euro we spend on research and development, 700,000 jobs directly and about 2.4 million jobs indirectly. So this is an industry that is often viewed as a cost, but I would tell you that if you say, how much do European member states pay to reimburse healthcare costs, pharmaceutical costs? 120 billion. But exports are 300 billion. So we need to all work together. We clearly have to understand the pressures on budgets. But as I would say, is if you can work together and reduce the demand, reduce the resource requirements, increasing economic growth. There's an article in the Financial Times this morning that will tell you that the pipelines of companies are full. And we need new products. We need cures for things like Alzheimer's disease that we cannot solve today. But we can only do that if there is ultimately an environment where innovation will find its place.
That's very, very helpful indeed. Martin, in a minute, I'd like you to reflect on that as well. Effectively, I think having the two ministers here of health and science and education, it's very helpful. On the one hand, and the Ministry of Finance was here as well. On the one hand, innovation brings jobs, brings economic growth. On the other, when that innovation doesn't lead to efficiencies and savings, creates a burden for the Ministry of Health. So the Ministry of Health has this challenge to select what are these many innovations, and we have evidence on that are cost effective. And the second challenge is how to introduce them in a particular health system. One of the areas under innovation is, one thing is to have the cost effectiveness data on paper on evaluation of these innovations. The other is whether we can integrate them within our health system, within our organizational structures, within our incentives, within our cultures and motivations of human resources. So I think both ministers reflect very much this conundrum here. We need to understand that the Minister of Finance will be very unhappy if the Ministry of Health is not introducing the right type of innovation, even if the Minister of Science is very happy because it brings patents and exports. So exactly as you said, I'd like to echo that, is this kind of partnership that we need to work on. I'll come back to you in a second, but Martin, you've been worrying a lot about that at European Union. Europe 2020 is all about that, the sustainable growth, smart, modern, and how you bring the jobs of innovation as well as the efficiencies for the health system. Do you want to reflect on that?
Yes, I think, first of all, sometimes we have a very rather narrow view of innovation. We tend to think of innovation, for example, purely in terms of technology. Certainly Europe historically is a very technology-oriented place, and that sometimes conditions our thinking. But what we particularly need to understand is that even technology innovation will only be successful if it's within a wider innovative framework, which includes also policy innovation. Sometimes I think the framework for innovation is not given sufficient importance. And the crisis, I think, is, I don't want to use the word opportunity because I know it is a very painful moment for many Europeans. So the word opportunity, sometimes I feel a bit uncomfortable saying this, but it is an occasion where we should reflect on this. What kind of policies do we have in place to encourage? And sometimes this is where the political leadership comes in. I'll just give one example, which illustrates this, which we are experiencing at the moment. We have a big problem, for example, in Europe with clinical trials. We have problems, and for example, that most of medicines are used by more elderly people, yet on the other hand, it's more difficult to carry out meaningful clinical trials with elderly patients, and a lot of other issues. The Commission made a proposal on the table, which is being discussed at the moment, to improve and have a bit more predictability in the outcome. What is the result? Although I must say we found a lot of support from the European Parliament, a lot of member states basically want to maintain the status quo. So clearly, this is where I see a big lack of political leadership. Excuse me for speaking so bluntly, but it's a bit counterproductive. And this is just one example, but I can show there are many others. The tobacco directive is another one. thanks to the brilliant leadership of the Lithuanian presidency and the preceding presidencies, I think we have made a lot of progress. But it was not an easy, and this is a no-brainer. 700,000 premature deaths every year, and that's the tip of the iceberg. What really matters is the years of ill health. Why was it so difficult to get this through? Why is it so difficult to talk about concepts such as harm reduction in a proper way, but in a way which makes use of the frameworks we already have in the legislation? And I could go on and on. So the most important form of innovation is innovation in the minds of the policymaker, first of all. And then you cascade that and create the conditions. If you don't have that, if you have a resistance sometimes to innovation, then we cannot blame the industries, the downstream actors, from giving up. And I fully agree with the point which the industry makes, rightfully pointing out, this is a sector that contributes actively to growth. It could contribute even more if we provide it with the right environment. It's the pharmaceutical sector, the medical devices sector, the IT sector, but increasingly, how to bring all of this together, because the products of the future will not be just better drugs or better devices or better IT applications, but a mixture of everything. So how do you bring together in one seamless product? And the one other thing I would like to conclude is linking to your earlier question on the skills mix. Even there we need innovation.
Yes.
Now, I understand, the discussions, is a nurse more cost effective than a doctor? Yes, it's true, and for some things, if you want to run, for example, a big vaccination program, maybe a nurse is much better than a doctor. But a nurse and a cardiologist are not interchangeable. So the area where we need also a bit of innovation is how to train people and create the systems to help them work together, because they need to work together. Chronic disease, for example, requires a lot of follow-up. So the role of the general practitioner, the role bringing back the figure of the family doctor, very important. The role other professionals can play. I was just back over the weekend. I had a meeting with the European dentists. The role of the dentists can play in prevention. They are the only professionals that can that regularly meet young people, for example. So they can pass on messages about tobacco, about nutrition, about alcohol abuse. The role of pharmacists, very important. Indeed. And one analogy, I like to use is that we have created, to use a musical analogy, we have created a lot of very skilled musicians. We don't have so many good conductors, but we need both. You need skilled musicians and you need also excellent conductors.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, innovation, and that came very much in Gastein, and Helmut said it very clearly. Innovation is social innovation, is organizational innovation, and innovation in the minds of the policymakers as well. Actually, it's interesting, Martin, that the last Nobel Prizes have been on behavioral economics, not mainstream economics. But Mr. Andriukaitis wanted to add.
Yes, I would like to react. Thank you, Martin, for beautiful intervention. You mentioned clinical trials negotiations. Of course, it's my first president experience. But I would like to say very open, yes. When I see European Union, I see that European Parliament is very innovative, always. Of course, a little bit exception when we speak about tobacco directive, yes. Because it was diminished. And the committee was more innovative. But when we speak about new ideas, of course, European Commission is also very innovative. But when I see intergovernmental approach is always conservative. Stop. It's not. I would like to raise a question very open. What does it mean when we speak about clinical trials? Big number of member states have own industries, and if you see their proposals, it's totally strange. We need in innovation, we need growth and jobs, we need in some progress. But from another hand, we see that, yes, sorry, we put on the table different technicalities and so on. It's always very difficult to reach compromises and move forward. Yes, I am very favorite that Lisbon Treaty we must strengthen. European Union needs a new constitution and in community-based approach. And intergovernmental approach is bad in many things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Monica, can you introduce that in your declaration? We need a new constitution. We need no. Genuinely, I think that's the kind of debate. That's the kind of debate we like to have today. We are not constrained here by council conclusions or decisions. Let me push forward. Christopher, I want to ask you another question, but you have to ask them it a bit shortly because I'm running out of time. But still, I have to ask this question to you. We targeted the pharmaceutical industry as the source of efficiencies. The savings is easy to go at, and you will acknowledge with me that there were efficiencies to be accrued there. What is the business model of the pharmaceutical industry to develop all that, to respond to all that, to the policymakers as they targeted the industry? And I said in a number of instances, for rightly so, in terms of efficiencies. What is your response to that? Are you the only ones, for instance, that are inefficient, probably?
Well, I must say there are days I would love to be sitting on the other side because when you're involved in the healthcare system, you certainly see all kinds of opportunities to reduce cost. It is true we are a soft target. You know, if I look at where I live in France, we have 33% more hospital capacity than Germany. I'm a German citizen. I have had my family in hospitals in France and in Germany, and I can tell you that the quality in Germany is absolutely as good as it is in France, and yet you look at the higher cost associated with that. In France, we are still reimbursing Doliprane, our paracetamol product. It costs less than €2 a box. Is that really the right way that we should spend healthcare? I don't think so. From the business model point of view, it gets dangerous when we are the only place you go to for economies. I run the third biggest pharmaceutical company in the world, and I'm constantly between, on the one hand, healthcare stakeholders, but also investors. And you cannot engage in any enterprise without people and capital. And yet, when you look at the share price of the pharmaceutical industry, we have earnings multiples that are lower than the people who are making potato chips and soft drinks, largely because we are seen as being too risky and there is not enough return. So people sometimes think, oh, well, this is a wealthy industry, but the reality is if you try to find venture capital for new biotechs, you will not find it in Europe today. You can find venture capital in the US, but not in Europe. And we have seen a steady migration of research and development outside the European Union. I was part of the G10 high-level working group back in 2000 when we were already trying to regain our innovative competitiveness. So I think that's why I'm so passionate about making sure we find the right balance. Yes, we have to have health technology assessment, and there are tools to make sure that pharmaceuticals are used right, but we also need to look at outcomes globally, and we have to look at the efficiencies of the whole healthcare system. This is an industry that is strategic to Europe. This is an industry where we have the people to compete on a global scale, and we need to find the right trade-offs.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me move on. We're talking, Cian Jones is the policy coordinator of the European Anti-Poverty Network. Cian, we talked a lot about innovation, but we want to hear about innovation, as we said, in the social area as well. I mean, we know that the crisis and the austerity response is affecting socioeconomic determinants, is increasing unemployment, is increasing poverty. We know that some of the austerity measures have decreased the access as well to the health services. So it's all very nice to talk about sustainable and inclusive growth. In practice, that's very, very difficult. How do we do that? And particularly, Cian, how we sell that to our economists, Ministers of Finance, that are leading the austerity response? How do you explain to them that actually this negative impact on poverty, this impact on poverty, may actually undermine their own goals of the austerity? Not an easy question.
Yeah. I'd like to just go back a bit before that, just to really underline, I think, a very core issue for me, and it may be something that's also possibly a little bit needs to be strengthened in the declaration as well, which is that you can't solve health outcomes issues by health policy alone. And I think the core issue that if we don't actually tackle the social determinants of health, you're not going to have any impact on the health policy. And of course, the reality at the moment is that the current approach is shooting itself in the foot. It's completely counterproductive because it's looking at sustainability in terms of efficiency at the expense of equity. And that is going to undermine any possibility of actually having an inclusive growth scenario. So, I mean, you know, not only is it a question of attacking poverty and exclusion, we have actually a target under Europe 2020 for inclusive growth of reducing poverty by 20 million by 2020. But actually, we've increased poverty by 8 million. And what's the impact of that? The impact of that is obviously not only an undermining of your rights approach, it also means you're creating problems for yourself, because the direct link between poverty exclusion and growing inequality is bad health outcomes, is increased health mortality, is increased child poverty mortality, is increased health costs. So, you know, that whole thing goes together, and you have to look at it all together if you're going to have the package. What's the argument you're going to use first of all, you should say, first of all, you've got to look at where are the success stories in Europe. The success stories in Europe are the countries which have invested in universal social protection systems, which are health and social protection. And I think that's the other key point that needs to be made. You know, we're looking for universal services, but you have to put the package together, which is health and social protection systems, that package, because there's no point in having good health services if people can't afford to pay for them, if they don't have the income support to be able to access them. So that whole package has to go together. And the countries that have done very well in the crisis, who haven't had a problem, are generally the countries that have got good social protection systems. And so the Commission's own report on social development says quite explicitly, you know, big spending on social spending is not the problem. It's not the problem. It's actually contributive to growth. And it's quite clearly shown that you need the social protection system, you need the active support to access to healthcare, access to social protection, access to inclusive labour markets, so that package, in order to provide the foundation for growth, both because people obviously need to consume, people need to have disposable income to spend, but also you need to have the base to be able to participate in employment, participate in the economy, and not to have the drag on the costs, the social and health costs. So I think, you know, we have to get that message across that you know, social investment, health investment is not a cost, it's a benefit. And it's quite clearly proven by the facts. And you look at the success stories, it's quite clear on that. And I think that's the problem that's been very much missed at the moment. And the other element I would just like to bring in here is I do think we have to remember about people. And the European Union has a major legitimacy crisis at the moment. And unless they can convince people that Europe 2020 is actually there to deliver for people, they're not going to get the support, and I think the European elections are going to show that. Yeah. And so I think showing that they're really there to reinforce social standards, and these are social standards on social and health, so please put the two together. Universal health systems, universal social protection. I don't think people are going to think that Europe is really worth voting for and supporting. And that is a really major problem. And you're going to get Eurosceptics coming in. We know that's a big problem. So I think it's a real crisis for the EU to make sure that is part of their inclusive growth story. It's there in the rhetoric, but it's not there in the facts. You know, in fact, the negative, people say EU policy is actually creating more poverty and social inequality, is actually undermining inclusive growth. So I think
get close there. Yeah. That's extremely important. That's extremely important indeed, that poverty has not only decreased, but it actually has increased. And indeed, a lot of the research that I have a number of colleagues here that have been doing work on shows actually that social coverage, you can actually waive recessions and austerity if you have a good social coverage system in place. You can protect those that are affected by the recession effectively, but that doesn't seem to be the case. But the question still is it an issue of communication, as Helmut was saying earlier? Because we're not quite making that case very effectively. We still see that the principles of austerity, the economic objective of austerity is there, is the main policy, still economic policy at the moment. So we're not demonstrating that if poverty increases, health outcomes go down, will not grow economically. Is it an issue of
no, it's an issue of politics.
I mean, politics.
Let's be quite clear.
I wanted to hear that.
The evidence base is completely contrary to austerity. I mean, you only have to read the major Nobel
Yes.
Prize winners to
Yes.
get those facts quite clear. Why are we not winning? It's not because of the evidence base, I'm sorry. It's because of the political ideology that's dominating at the moment. So we have to challenge the political messages about what kind of society we want. And I think we have to be much more proactive and saying we as EU citizens, we as European organisations are fighting for a different kind of Europe, and make sure that we get the right politicians in there who can deliver that message.
An issue of politics. I wanted to hear that. Thank you. Minister, you wanted to add in there?
To argue against.
Disagree?
Yes, because we are discussing about chicken and the egg. So is it social security chicken, or industry is egg, or opposite? So if we will have a good security, social security system, we will have industry coming back to the Europe, prosperous and numerous of taxes paid to the state budgets, or for the first, we should have normal taxes, industry in the Europe coming back with all clinical trials, with everything coming back to the Europe, and then we can afford us to increase best social security system in the world. Because those who are outside European Union will say that European Union is attractive as a very nice hub for social security, good health care, and everything else. I'm provoking some discussion, but
right.
we can discuss like that. Thanks.
I think that's extremely helpful, and in a minute I'll come back to you. I've been lying to you. I've been promising and I'll ask you to ask questions, but I'd like to have the final round, although, of course, Mr. Andriukaitis has
it's
a
not
priority.
about chicken and eggs. It's about human rights. It's about our priorities. It's about our honest. It is difficult to separate economic growth and social justice. Those are together, and inclusive growth. It's always yes. It is about ideology. It's about values. It's about Europe today. Now we need in decent jobs. Now we need in actions. Now, not about saying sorry if economy goes up, and then social protection will be better and so on. No, we must act today. Now to joining our forces to see social protection like core question in our debates.
They are chicken and egg at the same time. So it's creationism, not Darwinism. I know that both Zsuzsanna and Monica want to say something. Very short, please, Monica.
It's very short, and I'm speaking in my capacity as on the Stoiber group, so to working with President Barroso on the reduction of administrative burden for industry. And
you don't hear?
We need to remember.
There's a problem with the sound, I think. Please.
We need to. I'm saying that I'm speaking in my capacity as a member of the Stoiber group, working with President Barroso on increasing the conditions for industrial investment in Europe. And we need to remember that the majority of employers in Europe are small. So yes, of course, there is an important place and role for multinational investment for companies the size of Chris's and where they choose to invest. But we also need to remember that the vast majority of employers and the vast majority of industry are small, and they will not move. They cannot move. If you have a local coffee shop, if you're a local provider, a local photographer, you will not move. So we need to invest in both parts of our economy and sacrificing some of the values-based aspects to strengthen our population in order to create a competitive environment where we're competing against, as you say, Bangladesh or East Asia. I think this is a dangerous road to take.
Thank you very much. Zsuzsanna?
Well, what I wanted to say is that during the last decades, we have made good progress in Europe, as I presented in my presentation. And we are on the right track. Of course, austerity did not help, but it helped in one way. It helped us to further clarify our policies. What is the direction we want to take and what is the direction that we don't want to take? And many of the issues that we have to make are not linked to money. They are linked to the right policies. And I totally agree that the health policy and the social policy have to come together. We have to look at it in an integrated way together with the education sector also. And what we need in Europe is, once we have the right policies and we have that in place, we need the political commitment. And this is what I think we are still lacking in some parts of Europe. We don't have the political commitment everywhere for the right policies, and this is what we need. This is why we need to reach out to prime ministers and to the other sectors, social policy sectors, education sectors, and first and foremost to the finance sector. And for example, when we organized these conferences in Oslo, this series of conferences, we invited the finance sector, we invited the Troika, and very few finance ministers came to attend a ministerial level conference. So we have to find a better way of how we can reach out to the finance ministers. Other ministers are easier, as we can see in this panel also, and how we can get messages out to the prime ministers.
Thank you very much. Rita Bitten is at the European Observatory, Social Observatory, and she's representing perhaps the academic perspective, the analytical perspective here. Whenever I don't know anything about Europe, I ask always Rita. Rita knows it all and a bit more. Rita, it's perfect to have you at the end because you've been looking precisely at the complexity of governance brought by the crisis, reflected very much into this debate just now. The crisis, the financial crisis, the austerity has put governance, has changed the governance of the health systems at the national level as well as at the EU level. In which ways? What happens now with the balances between health, social and economy?
Thank you, Joseph, for this question. And indeed, I would like to link to the last intervention of Mrs. Jacob. There has been a substantial shift in the approach at EU level in particular with regard to support for reform in health systems. The traditional approach from EU side to reform health systems has been voluntary cooperation between member states, health ministers, health authorities in the driver's seats, and the EU is supporting them. By DG Sanko, through initiatives such as joint actions, health technology assessment, health professionals, and many other initiatives that have been taken. Also, within the strand of social protection coordination, there have been important initiatives to support member states in reorganizing their healthcare systems. There have been important initiatives taken to set up indicators. The cooperation on itself with regard to healthcare has maybe been weak in the past, but there has been now, it becomes clear that it will be very important, the kind of indicators that in the past have been established within the open method of coordination for healthcare. There has always been also economic governance and targeting healthcare. However, this message was very general and was not targeting specific member states. Within economic governance, the EU was always saying to member states that they should reform their healthcare systems to prepare for aging of population. What did, however, change in the last couple of years with economic governance? There has been the establishment of the European semester, and there have, of course, been the member states that are subject to an economic adjustment program who receive extremely detailed guidance on how they should reform their healthcare systems. But it are not only those member states that are subject to an economic adjustment program, but also for the other member states. Within the European semester, which is led by the DG ECFIN of the European Commission and by the Ministers of Finance, health ministers are not at all involved in this whole process. Here, there come first increasingly detailed guidance on how health systems should be reformed. Secondly, they're increasingly addressing individual member states. Thirdly, there's increasing guidance on the content coming from the finance ministers, not from the health ministers. And finally, there is an increasing potential for sanctions. Sanctions by fines, in particular for the member states that are member of the Eurozone, and that are under an economic deficit procedure. And this, I think, is really a shift of approach within the European construction with regard to guidance to healthcare systems reform. We see within the European semester that at this moment 16 member states did receive a country-specific recommendation with regard to reforming their healthcare system. 16 member states, and if we know that member states do receive on average six country-specific recommendations overall for all their policies with regard to fiscal consolidation, then we know that healthcare is one of the main targets in the fiscal policies that the EU is establishing at this moment. Furthermore, if we add to these 16 countries, we do add 4 more countries that did themselves announce very substantial reforms in their national reform programs they did introduce to the European Commission. We do add the 4 countries that are under an economic adjustment program. There are only 3 countries that are not subject to EU fiscal governance with regard to healthcare, and these are Denmark, the UK, and Sweden. And I think it's not a coincidence that these are the 3 countries that opted out from the Eurozone. So I think from the fiscal perspective, the healthcare systems have become one of the main targets.
Thank you very much, Rita. I wanted to pursue that a little bit longer. Martin.
Yes, I mean, because the previous speaker mentioned the word target. First of all, I think the fact that you have country-specific recommendations addressed to member states referring to health, in my view, is a positive thing. Why is there increasing reference to health? There are 2 reasons. First of all, as I said before, health expenditure accounts for 15% on average of government expenditure. So it would not be realistic to expect that it would be ignored, pushed aside, recommendations issued on everything else except 1/6 of the budget. So clearly, I think it shows that this is a comprehensive process. No sector can be excluded from reform. Second point is that it is also a reflection of the fact that, let's be honest, reform in many countries in health was always, let's say, kept on the back burner or the minimum done. If you look at the country-specific recommendations in themselves, they are saying things which I think we have been saying this very morning. Improve cost effectiveness of health systems, strengthen the role of primary health care. So nothing that we have not ourselves said. The answer is, why wasn't it done? And I think we should, with all due respect, it's very convenient to say it's you know, the current political ideology or whatever. I think we have to realize that a blame game is in no one's interest at the moment, because it could also be argued that, you know, if, as economists say, you should be counter-cyclical, when the things were going very well and we had the money, the reforms did not happen. On the contrary, spending just went through the roof. I think it is positive, and it's not just DG ECFIN that is behind the country-specific recommendations. The whole of the Commission is involved increasingly, but also we have reflected with the member states. In the Council, there was a very active reflection process on how the European semester could be used as a positive push. And the final point I would like to say is Europe, it's very convenient to blame Europe. And of course, Europe has to accept part of the blame for things. But austerity was never a policy in Europe. Austerity is reality when you have more needs than you have means. It's a reality which is forced upon you by circumstances. And what we have failed to mention very often is the fact that Europe, unique among all the regions of the world, has a lot of tools at its disposal, even without the need for sometimes new treaties. But if you look, for example, at structural funds, some countries, if you look at the share of health in structural funds, it's 0%. 0. They don't even use structural funds for health. So we are not even using the tools we have at our disposal.
Yeah.
So, and this is, I think, what we need to realize, that let's exhaust all the tools we have at our disposal and also ready to change things if we need to change them.
Thank you. Very short, because I wanted, yes, please.
A very short remark. I agree with you, but with one exception. If you see money in budgetary money in healthcare sector, yes. Some we must agree, yes, some money are expenditure, but some are investments. some by investments in new research, technologies, skills, and so on, so on. It's 20th century calculated GDP and in those rules, GDP calculated like health always like expenditure. Now we must clarify it more and more precise. Which money is investment in healthcare and which money is expenditure? Where we must react and be more effective, and where we say yes, sorry, it's long-term investment. We must calculate in another line. And I agree with you, but we must clarify it many things together.
Thank you very much. Helmut, you had a short point because I wanted to wrap up with all of you.
Just a few comments. I think we did quite well in Gastein because all the things were commented by you. So perhaps I can reply a little bit. Mr. De Becker, you said we have to invest a lot of things, money, and then HTA comes, and then we are in problems. But there are a new methodology coming where you have HTA in the development process, where we can't, because we know we can't afford to spend money on the wrong things. Will they really be used up in the health system? So there are ways for this. But on the other hand, we know now that only 50% of the population are confident in navigating the health system. And that are the users of the system. You don't have to know how your mobile phone works. That's not a problem. But the interface is much better than the one from the health service. 50%, every second one does not know how to navigate, has not high enough health literacy. I think that is something we should really think of. Then about the role of the EU. Until now it was more a self-help group of the member states. But the new election and the new phase after this will show in which way will we go. Will there be more integration? Because we saw that due to the financial crisis, the Commission had to take, and the member states did this, not the Commission, the member states, the representatives of the member states did the decisions. And we have really to find out how this way will go. The structural funds, yes, you still have to have 50% by your own. And we are just looking at a lot of member states on regional level, and they say, okay, we don't have those 50%. That's a problem sometimes too. So there's, and then the UK did not get any recommendations from the I guess the UK have enough problems by their own at the moment. So
there are no UK representatives.
So I think next year will be a very, very important year, how we deal with the crisis and how health, because of the European elections.
And that's where I want to go in this last few minutes that we have to wrap up. Rita, we're looking forward now, and you're a very creative thinker. You already put, all of you, many tools and mechanisms we have for this broad European collaboration at EU level and at European WHO level. Can you give us 2, 3 very quick points, ways forward? Don't worry about subsidiarity, don't worry about constitution or legislations, just ways forward as we have a new commission, as we have a new parliament, as the WHO offices keep pushing forward with all new initiatives. Can I sort of inspire with 2 or 3 points? And then I'll ask you an exercise of communication, and 1 minute each. Give us the Christmas sort of present as to what you want the European Union, the WHO to help you as member states, to help your agendas, to the vision from the industry and so on. And then I'll ask the 2 keynote speakers and finally our minister to reflect on that. And see where we could do that within 10 minutes. That's going to be a real challenge. Rita,
yeah, thank you, Joseph.
Inspire us as to what we got there to use.
Well, first of all, I would like to say, of course, there's broad consensus that improving cost effectiveness of healthcare system is important and is needed. So that's not the point of the debate. What I think is important is first that health authorities are getting into the driver's seat, which also means that health authorities have to show leadership to do so. I mean, there has to be willingness and there has to be room to intervene in the process. And the two are lacking at this moment, I think. And I think, I mean, there is, in the treaty, there's a clear basis for this. Article 168 clearly says that health systems, that the national authorities are responsible for this. So there is room to be more proactive and maybe to try to get a common view on objectives of healthcare systems, on indicators, and on how to get there, on ways to get there from the health authorities. If this will not happen, then others will do it, and it will be the Ministers of Finance, and we know that it will be from a different angle. Second thing is, I think, to rebalance the financial objectives and the social objectives of health system reform would require that there are much better indicators on what is the effect of the reforms in the social field. There is one very good indicator at this moment which has been established within the social protection performance monitor, which is on unmet needs in healthcare. And here we see that there has been, since 2008, a reduction of access to care in 18 of the member states. So this kind of indicators needs to be developed further, I think, and needs to get the same weight as the financial indicators in the scoreboard at EU level. There has been now a proposal for a scoreboard for the social indicators. Health is completely absent in there, whereas in the country-specific recommendations, health is omnipresent. So I think there has to be better indicators, better assessment, and maybe even enforcement, as well as for the financial targets. There could be social targets which could be enforced. If it is proved that there is a drastic reduction in access to care, then why not say to that member state that something has to happen and to enforce that member state to improve access to care? That's the second thing. So the monitoring, I think it's important. And then I think, a better balance between the social and the economic objectives of the
Clearly, we know what to do. We know we have the tools and the mechanisms, enough room to do those changes. And what we know above all is this political leadership, is this governance that we need among the politicians as well as many other social actors. Can I have that last 1 minute Christmas shopping, Christmas wish, as to reacting to what you heard today, reacting to the suggestions from Rita, from each one of you, please. May I start again with you, Deputy Minister Macri?
Thank you, Professor. If I may
please
say two very brief remarks on innovation, because one of the speakers said that governments are hostile to innovation. You know, in the Ministry of Health, we are all very conservatives, but we are not against that, because we would be very glad if the integration of innovation would be our problem. Actually, we have the problem that we cannot afford it, and we have to try to find the means to accept innovative practices. And another speaker said that the main problem is policies. Of course, it is policies, but communications is essential, because we don't consider in Greece that communicating problems, explaining to people and making them less reluctant to adopt and absorb all structural reforms is losing time. It's actually making things run smoother and the results being better. Now, to be brief, in Greece we have experienced technical assistance not only in the field of health but in other sectors as well, and that was very helpful. We had help from Europe, and I want particularly to stress the technical assistance and help given to us by the experts of WHO. Thank you, Susanna, for that. And with our suggestions would be that the EU Health for Growth Programme 2014-2020 address cost effectiveness in the long run, and we think that the European Network for Health Technology Assessment should be structured and organized in such a way to promote solidarity and strong support to the countries which lag behind the HTA issues. We would like to see initiatives and structural funds towards the strengthening of a primary care which ensures universality of access. We would like the health in all policy strategy not to remain a verbalism on which we all happily agree. We want it to be taken forward and implemented. And to conclude, we make these suggestions because we have found that all the various experience sharing and consensus building initiatives and events are valuable. They create a foundation on which we can build.
Thank you very much. Very, very specific recommendations and suggestions. Perhaps to start collecting for your declaration, our declaration, Monica. Minister Pavlakis?
Yes, I will come back on issues of collaboration, health, social system, and education. In fact, I think educational system is most important, because if we educate well people, they will understand about health issues, about social needs, and so on. So talking, it could not be considered separately from the all social security system education, as it data from the austerity period shows that those with better education had less chances to lose a job, their income decreased less than the average, and so on. So I should consider education as very, very important, alongside with scientific innovations which can lead us to better production, to innovative jobs, and so on. Not only selling the coffee in the coffee shop, but doing some technological advances for European Union. Thanks.
Thank you very much. St. John?
Yes, I mean, my wish list is a wish list, but I think we have to get back to a proactive agenda. So I think we should be talking about access to rights, right to healthcare, right to social protection systems and education. So that package we can sell as European social and health standards. And that isn't so far from the current agenda. The recent communication from the Commission on the social dimension of the EMU talked about the whole need to move forward on social standards, and I think the problem at the moment is that health stays outside, so health needs to come into that and become social and health standards.
The microphone, sorry.
Sorry, social and health standards, and they actually looked at the proposal of setting up a universal unemployment system, unemployment protection system across Europe. That was actually discussed, and it was one of the things on the agenda. It didn't get in as a legislative proposal, but it's there on the agenda. So I think we need to be more proactive, talking about the European Union as defending social and health standards. And the means to do that, there are lots of things we can be doing, like on the indicators I think are crucial. So, you know, we've now managed to get poverty and inequality into these social indicators on macroeconomic imbalances. There aren't any health indicators in there at the moment. And on the targets, we haven't again got health really in there either. So social and health should come together and make a joint fight.
Thank you very much. And the European wish list of the industry, Christopher Bierwacker.
I love this. All right, number one.
Make it short, though. Make it short.
Number one is a common approach to how you're going to define the value of medicines. Europe is in advanced stage, is much more advanced than other regions in health technology assessment. But 28 systems of health technology assessment does not drive value and increase cost. Second is we need to avoid a one-size-fits-all pricing regimen. If we're going to have transparency, the industry agrees, but there also has to be agreement that some countries can afford to pay more and some countries will need to pay less. Third is we need support for an innovation agenda in Europe. We need support for Horizon 2020. And as you'll see from Professor Palmali later on today, greater cross-border coordination of public research activities. And third, we need a health agenda agreed across Europe that focuses more on prevention and wellness and greater public education so that we can actually improve the sustainability of our healthcare systems.
Thank you. Now, let me ask first, I'll ask the keynote and the Minister, Monica. You'll have your wish list in the declaration, though, but very briefly now.
This is a little bit beyond that. The first point on my wish list is around the governance, and I think we need to recognise and congratulate that the fact that we have country-specific recommendations that are generally okay for health is almost completely alone thanks to the work of DG Sanko. And so from this perspective, we need to recognise that it is that, thank you very much, and however, that is not enough. And going back to Rita's point here, the governance aspect of how this process works, the involvement, both the political will and also the technical involvement of the health ministries is essential, because we cannot guarantee that we will continue to have good country-specific recommendations based on the work of DG Sanko. It's not fair and it's not realistic. So, and in my view, that the extension here goes on to Martin's second point about blaming Europe. Yes, there is blame in Europe in the public space, but the minister's point about, well, what happens when the ministers get together behind closed doors, this is not a European problem. We have a member state problem about what member states are doing and how citizens can hold them to account when they are not being watched. And here, this is an issue, and there's a governance issue there as well. And I was a bit concerned that the audience laughed when we were talking about a new treaty, because those discussions are happening. I myself have been in a meeting with the foreign ministers talking about greater political and economic union. Germany reiterated this call after their elections this September. It will happen. How and when is a matter of discussion, is a matter of debate. But if we are not there as health, if we are not there with what we want, how we want that competence to be defined and to what extent, then someone else will be making that decision for us. My second point, this is very quick, the narrative. Yes. This is the communication point. So Martin mentioned that we do not have the money. Austerity is inevitable. I refuse to believe that's true. We are still the richest region in the world. We are still richer than anybody else. The money is not in the right place, but we must not buy the narrative that we have run out of money. It is not true. It is what we are choosing to invest in, not whether we have money or not. And finally, the tools point. So Martin mentioned structural funds, and Susanna mentioned the advocacy and communication aspects. And we are lucky that we have parts of our political leadership, like Susanna, who are able to do it, who know the media people and the prime ministers and so on. But as a health workforce, we do not know how to access structural funds, which is why we do not do so. We do not know how to communicate with our colleagues and get our messages across. And so this is something that we must focus on, the governance, the narrative, and the tools as a sector and our skills to do it.
Thank you very much. Helmut.
Yeah, at Christmas, miracles happen. And I wait for a miracle that suddenly those people who will run for the new parliament realize that there is a social dimension of Europe, and that more and more health system literate people are interested in running for European Parliament, so that the new power that the Parliament gets with this new election can be used and can challenge a little bit the...
Can we put you forward as a candidate?
Yeah, if there's a country who's looking for someone to be put on the list...
We have a candidate for being a member of Parliament. I think you're absolutely right. I take this point very seriously. Rita, you already put your wish list to some extent. Give us one priority or two of that wish list.
Well, I think that I would like to stress that there is scope for improving the EC Treaty, Monica, certainly, to rebalance better the social and the economic objectives. However, I think within the current treaty, we have a very strong case to improve healthcare systems from a healthcare perspective, from the public health perspective. There is the Article 168, which obliges the EU in all policies to have a high level of health, and that the health authorities would be in the driver's seat. Furthermore, there is the article, the social clause, which pleads for a high level of social protection. So these are already very good bases, which could and should be used when there is a political will to do so. So I would plead to better involve the actors who are responsible to their population, to better monitor, better indicators, and then to include this all in the current processes.
Our two keynotes, our institution and the agency and the minister, you have to respond to lots of things and very briefly, but just a couple of thoughts. Martin, are you ready to begin to change the treaty? Help member states to rewrite the treaty?
I won't comment on that. I'll leave it to others.
Over coffee later on.
Yes. No, I think, first of all, it's very important that Europe gets a clear message from the member states where this famous added value lies. I think we all agree the diagnosis of the problem, if I could use that term, is being done. We all know what the problems are. There's a large consensus on what needs to be done. I think the problem is the how to do it, how to manage this politically, and what role can Europe play, as Article 168 says, to complement and support the member states. So reform needs to happen, but Europe does have a role. We need to have a clear message of what role Europe can play and what role the tools we have at our disposal can play. And that's a very clear, very important message, particularly at a time when, around this time next year, we will be entering a new cycle, a new political cycle. Europe needs to have a very clear message of where the priorities lie. I think we should not spend too much time discussing the politics aspect of it. We need to get down to the basics and start addressing the problem. So again, I understand, yes, clearly the health and social aspects are very important. All aspects are important. I like your term driving seat. I think we will only have a handle on the problem when all the ministries consider themselves to be ministries of health. And this is not utopia. If you look at what our experience in the environmental field, this is exactly when the big change was made in the 90s, when environment was no longer just discussed by environmental groups and ministers of environment, it became also central to the economic, to the social, and big changes happened in a few years which had been impossible to imagine before that. We need to have that kind of moment in health as well.
Thanks very much.
Really means that there's a golden opportunity to do that.
Thank you very much indeed. Sujana.
First of all, I hope that the upcoming EU elections will put the people-centered approaches into the center, and it will use health and well-being as a goal, as a target to be achieved. Because what we want to avoid is that in the upcoming parliamentary elections, those who are skeptical about the European Union will gain in the elections. So that is something very, very important to really decide how the European Union election should be guided. And this is not something that I should advise on from a WHO point of view, but as a European Union citizen, I am very interested to get this election right. The second issue I wanted to highlight is that I also believe that health ministers have to be in the driving seat. They have to be in the center in all decisions that affect health and the health systems. And this goes also for the austerity situations when difficult economic decisions have to be made by the Troika or finance ministers or prime ministers. The health minister's voice should be heard in that discussion, because otherwise we get it wrong. As we said also in the Oslo report, all decisions on austerity have to be put into the longer health policy and health system perspective. Then the third issue I wanted to highlight is that we have to continue our good work, and a lot of good work has been done in Europe and is being done in Europe on improving the health outcomes. But we need to do much more to reduce the inequalities in health. That is growing between the countries. It is unacceptable that we have 40 times difference in maternal and infant mortality. It is growing also between the countries, and we have to put this into the center of our policies. This is why we adopted the Health 2020, and we have to continue with that. But for that, we need new type of governance, which is more horizontal and more participatory. We need more political commitment, more intersectoral collaboration with the social policy sector, education sector, and finance sector, reach out to the prime ministers. And on this front, we have to do much, much more than we have been doing until now. And we also need integrated policies, and we need to invest upstream, because what we have been doing, in spite of all the agreements in previous various fora, that we invest into primary health care, we put equity and inequities into primary health care, we integrate health promotion, disease prevention. We have never implemented that, and in the last 10-15 years, we basically lost the upstream inventions, and we have not really put public health high on the political agenda. It is coming back with force, because everybody realizes that this has to come, and we have to invest much more into the social determinants, health promotion and disease prevention. And of course, in the health systems area, we have also gone a long way to know what we want to do. We want to have people-centered health systems with strong primary health care, which integrates all these public health functions and upstream interventions. And we need to have much more integrated and coordinated services between the different levels of the healthcare system and between the different services. And I think these are the key issues that we would like to see going ahead, and of course WHO is fully behind this. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much. Mr. Andriukaitis, the last words.
I would like to be very brief. Of course, people-centered approach, community-based approach, solidarity, and of course I think I fully agree with previous speakers. All ideas are raised, and we think that it will be very nice to have good conditions in our Vilnius Declaration. And like presidency country, for us it's very important to to read Vilnius Declaration and to look forward with goodwill that we must solve social determinants, inequalities, and we all need in solidarity. Thank you. And Christmas with solidarity is only one way.
Thank you very much indeed. The bad news is that I haven't managed to bring you on board. The good news is that you have plenty of time in the next sessions, I hope, to do so. The good news is that we'll learn an awful lot in this marathonian session. As good news is that I'm not going to try to summarize it, so I'll let you go for lunch. But only one reflection. We've been complaining about communication, lack of leadership, being in the driving seat, and yet, if these colleagues here are a sample of policymakers, NGOs, regional director, WHO, and so on and so forth, and academia, what is the problem? Because they demonstrated clearly that communication and leadership. Perhaps the technology should allow us to clone all of you and spread you around Europe. Thank you very much indeed for your work.